Cool, thank you all for showing up. I also want to see a show of hands. How many of you watch R-rated movies on a regular basis? Cool, you're used to dirty words, naughty words? R, right? R, yes. R or better. R or better. How's that? You're used to hearing bad language then. Good, because I cuss a lot in my presentations. Because I have a lot of money now, because my company got acquired, so fuck it. Okay, so let's talk about accessibility. Now, if this was actually marked as a beginner level class or beginner level presentation, but this is going to be some pretty advanced shit that is going to cover a lot of why things are the way they are with accessibility. All right, so what is this thing? A button. Cool. What does it do? You just I don't know. You click. Wait a minute. Nope. What does that do? Nothing. Nothing. Who could tell me what the hash mark is called in the HTML specification? It is a fragment identifier separator. The hash mark there, the pound sign, if you're old like me, is intended to be a signifier that the string that follows it is identifying something on the page, either an ID or a named anchor, right? So developers, what do? We use that as a way to say do nothing, right? We're actually just fucking up a link. Okay, so calling it a button and styling it like a button doesn't make it a button. Adding JavaScript so it acts like a button doesn't make it a button. Adding an ARIA role of button doesn't make it a button. And so that's the thing to keep in mind. The Microsoft UX guy says, is the command button used to initiate an immediate action? If not, use another control. So this is where I get into the DOM and accessibility. Now, let's get into why I'm doing this presentation specifically for you all. That is because accessibility is boring. Unfortunately, the fine folks at ada.gov have redesigned this site, and it actually looks a lot better than that. But this is what I mean. Like, if you look at this design of this website, this is what most people think about when they think about accessibility, right? Like, ooh, what a great design. You know what I mean? Like, it's all just two colors and layouts and all that sort of stuff. And we pile a bunch of requirements onto you, policies and procedures and standards and laws and rules, and we give you documentation. Did you know that the WCAG 2.1 specification, the normative part of the specification, that's the actual standard itself, is 105 pages when printed out. How to meet WCAG, because obviously it's obtuse enough that we have to have another document to explain to you how to meet WCAG, that's 113 pages printed. Understanding WCAG is 230 pages printed. The techniques and failures document for WCAG is 780 pages printed and contains over 400 techniques and failures. In fact, if you were to print this out on regular A1 paper and then weigh it, it is roughly the same weight as the amount of shit produced by a sheep every given day. Yes, and that's what you should think about standards. I would much rather teach you one thing, only one thing. Always ask yourself, what is this thing and what does it do? So this takes me to a discussion of markup. Does anybody know what the picture is on the screen there? This is great because usually when I do this presentation, the screen has got much less, it's got a much worse light contrast. That's an old letterpress. Anybody know what the letterpress is? Yeah. So letterpress was created in the 1300s and made famous by who? Martin Luther. When he printed out his document and stapled it to the tree. You guys don't know this story. Anyway, I wasn't there. I know I'm old, but I wasn't really there. Anyway, the Gutenberg press, the Gutenberg letterpress, used these steel letters. They were little blocks, and what would happen is that the person who wrote the manuscript that was then to get printed would put marks on the manuscript to tell the letterpress operator what the thing was that he was supposed to be, how he was supposed to lay out this manuscript. In high school composition class, for instance, you might have seen a little mark on your screen that looked, or on your paper that looked like a P with an extra line on the side of it. That meant that your teacher was telling you to put another paragraph in. You guys didn't go to high school composition classes? Okay, cool. Anyway, marking up a document is denoting what the pieces of the content are. So hypertext markup language is an SGML syntax that has generic semantics that are appropriate for representing the information. When HTML was created, it was created specifically with tags and attributes meant to dictate what things were what. Headings, paragraphs, titles, all that sort of stuff, right? Yes? Okay, cool. So a bunch of things were not initially in HTML. For instance, the image tag itself was not actually in HTML when it was first created by Tim Berners-Lee. But the popularity of the web and the ease of making web pages resulted in an explosion in things like browsers, and everybody wanted to differentiate themselves from each other, so they did all this proprietary stuff, like creating blink elements and marquee elements and image tags and all this sort of stuff, applets and base fonts and all that sort of stuff. And then there was the creation of JavaScript or JScript if you were Internet Explorer, and CSS, and all that sort of stuff created a pile of chaos. And if you're old like me, you remember when you'd see little things on the bottom that says best with Netscape or whatever it was, and it truly was best with Netscape or whatever, and didn't work at all on the other browsers. So a bunch of standardistas got together and said, we need to figure out like how to make this actually work properly. We need to make sure that there is a standardized way of addressing how this stuff should work, and they created the document object model in 1998. Let's take a quick diversion. What is this thing? Drop down. So what do? You just like click it and select one, right? Yeah, that's exactly right. So the HTML select element represents a control that presents a menu of options. The options within the menu are represented by option elements, which can be grouped by op group elements. Options can be pre-selected for the user. You guys knew that. Tab moves focus into the field. A second tab key selects the current item on the list. Tab updates the field's value, closes the drop-down list, moves focus to the next focusable item in the tab order. Alt and down arrow and/or space opens the drop-down list and moves focus to the selected option. If nothing is selected, then focus moves to the first option in the list. If the combo box is not editable, then the space bar may also be used to open the drop-down list. Up and down arrow moves focus up and down the list. As focus moves inside the drop-down list, the edit field is updated. Enter selects the current item on the list, updates the value, highlights the selected item in the drop-down list, closes the drop-down list, and returns focus to the field. The escape key closes the drop-down list, returns focus to the field, and does not change the current selection. Typing a letter, or any printable character key, moves focus to the next instance of a visible node whose title begins with that printable letter. That autocomplete behavior continues so long as you're typing letters for words that exist in the options. It also exposes these roles to accessibility APIs. That is what a select element does. So, raise your hand if you've ever created a custom select element. Did yours do that? No, it didn't. So here's a cool video that my audio isn't working on. Hold on a second.
Island Islands, Afghanistan,
Yay.
United Kingdom, United States. Closing menu, United
Let me do
States,
this again.
pop-up button.
Hold on. So what we're going to listen to is the difference between a native select element and one of the most popular custom select elements
Blank
out
pop-up
there.
button. Menu 252 items check mark. United States, United Kingdom, Afghanistan, Island Islands, Afghanistan, United Kingdom, United States. Closing menu, United States, pop-up button. Edit text, blank. You are currently on a text field.
Yeah. Hey, y'all, watch this. That's like hold my beer, but for developers. Anyway, yeah, Harvest, now I don't want to call them out too much because I actually use their product and I really, really like it. But yeah, that is basically not good. So let's talk a little bit about the DOM. So for any of you who don't know this stuff, we're going to get into it. So what's the DOM? It's a cross-platform and language-independent convention for representing and interacting with objects. Objects in the DOM tree may be addressed and manipulated using methods on the objects. Public interface of a DOM element is specified in its application programming interface. So, for those of you who don't know object-oriented programming, I'm going to give you a super quick crash course in it. Objects are things, right? And when you take an intro to programming class, they'll say, like, it's a car. Actually, a car is a big shitload of different objects, but anyway, we'll just keep going. It's car. Cars can do things. Those are the methods. There are also things that describe the car, like what color it is. Those are the properties. In object-oriented programming, an interface is basically a description of the things that should be in an object. In other words, you're not saying specifically all cars must do that, but you're saying that this is our interface, this is our base description of what a car should do, okay? Now, browser vendors themselves are free to do whatever the heck they want. Nobody's going to make anyone do anything, much less browser vendors. That would hinder the growth of the web, but standards-conforming browsers will, at minimum, conform to the requirements as set forth in the DOM specification itself. So in object-oriented programming, we have these things called classes. These are going to encapsulate the conceptual representation of an object. And again, like I said, they have methods and properties. Those are things that they do, and so on and so forth. Interfaces, as I said, determine what methods and properties the object should have. It does not define the final implementation. The browser vendors are going to do that. So let's take a look at one of these things. So one of the other things to note about object-oriented programming is this concept called inheritance. In the DOM, the very base object is called node. Then the next child from that is element, and then HTML element is the base of anything that you're going to be using, right? So this is the interface for HTML element. This is what you get when you have a span, right? You're going to have a bunch of attributes. You're going to have ID, title, lang, dir, and class name. That's the basic element. This is what you have when you have a span, okay? So if you create a button out of a div or a span, the only thing you get out of the DOM is this stuff. Anything you attach to that object, of course, is going to be up to you. Now let's take a look at, whoops, all right, beautiful. Shit, I went too far. So are these radio buttons? So hell yes, hell no, okay. So this is what radio buttons should look like. All right, I love it when my slides do this. So HTML input element is when you create a radio button, you're implementing HTML input element, which is inheriting from HTML element. So again, with inheritance, all those attributes that were in HTML element are carried through, and you get a bunch of additional properties, right? You get default value, default checked, so on and so forth, the form that it's related to, the access key, all that sort of stuff. And if this resolution was better, you would see that there's also two methods that are available to the radio buttons. So that's awesome. So with a radio button, what does it do? With a radio button, users make a signal choice among a set of mutually exclusive related options. Users can choose one and only one option. Let's watch a video.
Voiceover on Safari. Pretty check. Leaving HTML content. Hell yes. Are these radio buttons? Radio button. 1 of 2. Leaving HTML content. Back. Leaving group. Hell no. Are these radio buttons? Radio button. 2 of 2. Hell yes. Are these radio buttons? Selected radio button. 1 of 2. Hell no. Are these radio buttons? Selected radio button. 2 of 2.
So what do you notice about this video? It doesn't show the state. You can hear it. The screen reader is doing a great job of telling us what these are, right? It's telling us that they're radio buttons. It tells us that they're grouped. It tells us that there's 2 of them. We get all that semantic information for free because we've implemented the right things, but we're not managing the visible state. So that was a trick question. You're welcome. So this is what that does. So pretty checkable is just some sort of, I don't know, these slides are kind of old, so it might be a jQuery plugin, but what they've done is they've done this thing where they've positioned the actual radio button off screen, probably negative 1,000 pixels or whatever. They're replacing it with whatever you want for your images. I use the circle just to be tricky, and then you position it there. And what happens is, what they forgot to do when they created that is toggle the visual state on select instead of on click. It's done on click. So if you arrive to this group and you use up and down arrow keys, which you could do in radio buttons, it's gonna change the selection, but they somehow believe that the only way that you can select something is by clicking it. Let's talk really quickly about how all of this stuff works. This is actually a description of how the web browsers are going to work. You have the rendering engine taking the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, rendering it onto the screen as a series of objects, and then also creating the DOM. How this works for accessibility APIs is what's important. If any of you were here for Rachel's presentation, she talked about how you get a lot of accessibility for free just by using semantic HTML. And this is why. Every single element in the HTML specification is mapped to an object type, right, that we were talking about before in the DOM. And also those are mapped to a role or states and properties in the accessibility API. So what happens is basically, as a developer, we are sending a couple of files. We're sending HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to the browser, and we're saying, please, browser, can you please create these objects and things that I said to put on the screen? And then the browser is going to be, yeah, sure. Or if it's, not conforming to the standard, then no, we're not going to, whatever it's going to do. But what happens is, again, that gets loaded up into the browser's rendering engine, renders the thing to the screen, constructs the DOM, JavaScript acts as the controller, and then there's this, I guess, kind of middleware, so to speak, between the assistive technology that the user's using and the browser, and that's called an accessibility API. So if you've ever inspected an element in the DOM using DevTools or something like that, you'll know that the element has gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of properties, hardly any of which would be useful to a screen reader, right? It's not going to care about the top left pixel coordinate of the input element, right? It doesn't give a shit about that. All it cares about is what is this thing and what does it do, right? So that's the stuff that happens with the accessibility API. It sort of filters out all of this stuff. It keeps track of object states and properties and interprets that to the accessibility, to the assistive technology. So the fact that it said radio button 1 of 2, radio button 2 of 2, is because the accessibility API has gotten that information from the DOM. It understands the relationships between radio buttons, the fact that these two things are grouped together, all that sort of stuff. It understands all of that stuff. Every element in HTML is also is again, like I said, mapped to an element is given a specific object type. It's also mapped to a specific role in ARIA, and also mapped to specific object types in these various APIs. So MSAA, for instance, that was the very first accessibility API. It was created by Microsoft. Actually, it was created by Microsoft so that Flash could be accessible. Kind of neat. So MSAA has now been superseded by iAccessible2. UI automation is used by Linux, and then AX is the accessibility API for Mac OS. So everything is mapped to one of these types of roles, and it's going to depend on certain features or attributes, as you can see, and also is going to implement certain interfaces, as you can see as well. But that's how accessibility works, is because of this mapping. So when you create HTML elements, custom elements, and things like that, you're going to need to make sure you can map that stuff properly, and that's with ARIA. So what is this thing? It's a thing I stole off of CodePen. What does it do? Nothing! These are icons that have no accessible, they provide no accessible name to the links, and yeah, there you go. So if you were in Josephine's presentation, or probably Rachel's, we talked about the principles, the 4 principles of WCAG: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. The only one that I really want to mention too much more than anything else is this concept of robustness, and that's that it can be interpreted reliably by a variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. That includes things like name, state, role, and value. So the name is, what do we call this thing? So that would be the label for our form field or the alt text for our image. The state is, what is it doing? And implicitly, what can it do? So a checkbox can be checked, unchecked, read-only, disabled, and mixed, right? That sort of thing. What is it? That's the role. What kind of thing is it? Checkbox, radio button, whatever. And then what value does it represent when it's submitted to the server? Or I like to talk about the principle of least astonishment. Any agile folks here? Any big agile nerds? No? That's okay. Ward Cunningham is one of the big founding fathers of agile. Him and his brother have a blog that looks like it was designed in 1996, so that's really good for a history lesson. But they have all this massive information on extreme programming on their website, and I actually stole this from a discussion of object-oriented programming, actually. They say the result of performing some operation should be obvious, consistent, and predictable. That's when it comes to like what a method should do, but I stole it for my analogy to UX, which is that the user interface should be predictable, right? We know, just going back to my checkbox and radio buttons example, we know if we experience a little circular thing with some text next to it, that's a radio button, and I can select one and only one. And once one of them is selected, something has to be selected. I know that. If we take it and make it square, I know it's a checkbox, and I can select one, none, all, or some. I know that by experiencing it. I know that because I have a lot of experience using it. And so if it looks the same, it should act the same. That's from the Android developers' design principles. Here's a really fun bit of accessibility knowledge for you. You see a lot of people point to this thing in the background here. It's called a stramp, and they go, this is universal usability, this is universal design. Yeah, it's universally terrible. This is definitely a case of something being designed by somebody who doesn't actually know anything about accessibility. Because first off, this is a horrible experience for everybody. You're going to have an uneven number of steps at every level, no matter what you're doing. If you're able-bodied and you can walk. Then the other part is the actual ADA guidelines for ramps says that for every 12 inches of horizontal travel, you should have no more than 1 inch of vertical travel. That's way more than that. And the second one is that you're supposed to have railings, because if you accidentally go a little bit too far to one side or another on your wheelchair on that thing, you are having a really bad time. So people are like, universal design, and I'm like, yes, it's bad for everybody. Yeah, so anyway, next time you see that in a slide deck, that you can get your chuckles out of that. Now, the iOS human interface guidelines say consistency lets people transfer their knowledge and skills from one part of an app's UI to another, and from one app to another app. A consistent app isn't a slavish copy of other apps, and it isn't stylistically stagnant. Rather, it pays attention to standards and paradigms people are comfortable with. I'm going to go over my time because I have 20 seconds left and I have like 5 more slides. But you got a break next, so there you go. An OS X user automatically knows how to use such standard interface elements because they're better than Windows users. No, it doesn't say that. Regardless of the app in which they appear. That's from OS X. KDE, like I know there was a Linux person in here earlier. There you go. There's the central aim of the KDE Human Interface Guide is to create a consistent experience, blah, blah, blah. Okay. In other words, ask yourself, what is this thing and what does it do? Mentally, we do that hundreds of times as soon as we load up a user interface, right? We know, for instance, that the logo in the top left is going to be something that we click and go to the home page. Like, we know these things from our experience. What is this thing and what does it do is answered for us automatically. As a developer, we need to make sure that we answer that for the end user. What are the goals of the user? What are the goals of the business? How does this UI element contribute to both goals? And even better, how is this UI element better for the user than all competing options? I once had a customer, they created a time tracking application for people for work. And they had an administrative interface where they would set up people, and they had these two patterns that they used in their design language. One was for certain interactions, they would launch a dialogue. Obvious, right? We need to interrupt the flow, get some information, put them back. Another one was that for some interactions, they would have a tab-based interface. What they ended up having was tabs that launched dialogues that had tabs in them. And they said to me, Carl, how do we fix this? And I said, don't do that anymore. In other words, what are the options, the design options that we have available to us that is better than the one we have right now? Do that. If what you're doing in your UI is not better than all the other options that you have available to you, you've done the wrong thing. What does it do? How does it operate via mouse? How does it operate via keyboard? How is focus managed to, through, and from the control? What happens when the user interacts with the control? Okay. Does the control exist? Cool, use it. Yes, but support sucks. Use progressive enhancement. CSS styling is hard. Give the designer a wedgie, and then use progressive enhancement. And if it doesn't exist, you're screwed. No kidding. Use ARIA. ARIA, we already talked about. I'm going to bounce past through all this. ARIA doesn't do anything. It helps make predictability, adds predictability to the UI controls. There we go. So my last slide, because I've gone over time. Anybody know what this is? Anybody know where this is? New York City. And it's the Louvre in Paris. I did not take this picture. I was there. I took a picture. It sucked. So I stole this one off their website. But this is awesome. So basically, when you go to the Louvre, over here on this side is the entrance to the museum. You walk in and you see this darker area here. That is both the entranceway for people who are going to use the stairs and people who are going to use the elevator. And you walk in right side by side. And the person gets in the elevator goes down, you walk down if you're not the elevator user, and you get out right next to one another. You don't have to go to some other part of the building to get in with an elevator. You get in with the same way as everybody else does. Good design is the convergence between creativity and capability. That is me. QR code takes you to Goatsy. No, actually it takes you to my LinkedIn. Kudos to you if you know what Goatsy is. If you don't know what Goatsy is, do not Google it, and do not blame me when you do Google it. And there's my contact information. Thank you all.